he besought him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed round him, and the woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years had spent all of her living upon physicians, and could not be healed by anyone, came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the multitude surround you and press you, and you say, 'Who touched me?' But Jesus said, 'Come, someone touched me, for I perceive the power has gone forth from me.' And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she had immediately been healed. And Jesus said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace.' While Jesus was speaking, a man from the ruler's house came and said, 'Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore.' But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, 'Do not fear, only believe, and she shall be made well.' And when Jesus came to the house, he permitted no one to enter with him, except Peter and James and John, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and bewailing her. But Jesus said, 'Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping.' And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, Jesus called, saying, 'Child, arise.' And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And Jesus directed that something should be given to eat, and her parents were amazed. But he charged them to tell no one what was happened.
Peace be unto you, the wise herald of the Holy Gospel.
Glory to you, Lord. Glory to you. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning. I know you can do better. Good morning.
Good morning, Eminence.
Again, I thought there were people here. In today's gospel reading, Jesus is interrupted yet again. Every miracle of Christ was an interruption. The first one, the wedding of Cana. He's sitting there with his disciples at the reception of the wedding, and they've run out of wine. And so his gathering is interrupted so that he can perform a miracle and to take the water and turn it into wine. Another time, he is walking with his disciples, and he crosses the funeral of the only son of a widow, of Nain. And he's interrupted in his path by this funeral procession. He stops and he raises the man from the dead. He had compassion on the widow, her only son. Think about it. The Theotokos at that time was a widow. Joseph was gone. She only had one son, and he was going to die. And Christ saw this and had compassion on the woman and raised the son. But it was an interruption, for sure. Jesus is somewhere and he gets word that his friend Lazarus has died. He doesn't get up and run, but it's an interruption in his planned journey that day. He goes and he raises a man from the dead 4 days. And now today we have Jairus' daughter. a 12-year-old girl that's dying. Her father, the leader of the synagogue, goes there thinking, if I can just get the master, this guy that I've been hearing about, who's performing miracles, maybe, just maybe, he can save my daughter. And so he sends someone to Jesus and says, Jairus' daughter is dying, can you come? And he's going toward Jairus' house. And there's a large crowd. And he gets interrupted on his path to Jairus' house. Who touched me, he said. Who touched you, the disciples say. People are pushing you from all directions, Lord. Who touched you? Everybody's touching you. No. Someone touched me. I felt the power leave me. And so he turns around in the crowd. And the woman who has a bleeding disease, a flow of blood, it says, for 12 years, the same as the little girl's age, she's been trying to heal with physicians so many times, and things don't get any better. In fact, they get worse. But she feels, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, the hem of the garment is the bottom of this robe thing. The bottom. If I can just touch the garment's edge, I may be healed. Now this woman's got a problem. She's got the bleeding disease, but she's considered unclean. She can't go into the temple. She can't go into the synagogue. She can't go into the marketplace because she's unclean. She's bleeding. And people know this. Don't touch me because then I become unclean. This is the way they thought back then. And so, who touched me? And she knew she'd been busted, if you can say in the terms we use today. She was busted. And so she admits that she had touched the hem of his garment. But for her to touch the hem of the garment meant she was in the crowd. Where? In the crowd. On the ground. She's down in the dirt, groveling dust to touch the hem of the garment. So strong was her faith that she could receive healing, that she took the risk. And as soon as she admitted it, Christ told her, it's okay. In the meantime, though, in this interruption of saving this woman of the bleeding disease, Jairus' daughter dies. So now the 12-year-old is gone. But Jesus receives a message of this and just keeps on going. He could have saved the little girl before she died. But that's too easy. The interruption made sure that she died so that he could raise her to life. We'd already seen the son of the widow of Nain had been dead for a couple of hours, because when he died back then, they buried him before the sun went down. There was no going to the embalmers and doing a funeral 5 days later and waiting for the family. No, that day, before the sun went down, they put him in the ground. So a couple of hours. Lazarus had been dead 4 days. He came to life. This little girl had been dead a few minutes. When he got to the courtyard of Jairus' house, all the people were there that were already crying because the girl had died. Wailing. You know, in that part of the world, they actually have professional wailers. You pay them to cry so that everybody feels sad. Okay? And so the professional wailers were there, and everybody's crying. And she said, "Well, what's this cacophony? What's all this wailing about? The little girl has died. She's not dead. She's asleep." And they laughed at him. They mocked him. He goes in with a few of his disciples, with the parents, and raises the girl from the dead. And they gave them something to eat. But if that interruption had not occurred with the woman of the bleeding disease, the little girl would never have died. And so there would be another example for his disciples, for his followers to see that, you know what, people die and they come back to life. He was prepping them. Because who was going to die? He was. And he was going to come back to life. So it wouldn't be like the first time they saw somebody die and come back to life. It was the fourth time they had seen somebody die and come back to life. And yet they didn't believe it when it happened at first. At the crucifixion were the women and the teenage disciple, John. The teenager was there. All the men were hiding. They were afraid for their lives. But not John. The teenage boy was curious, or maybe stupid. Because they would have killed him too if they realized who he was. By the way, of all the disciples, only John lived to 100 and died a natural death. All the rest of them that ran and hid died violently at the end of their ministries. So the innocent one that stayed, the young person that stayed, received the long life. But the first to hear the news were the women, because the men were hiding. And when they came and said something, they sort of doubted it. And yet they'd already seen 3 people come back to life. This was the master. They had seen all kinds of miracles. Why did they doubt it that he would come to life? Because they were human beings. For us, 2,000 years later now, we have to understand what they were experiencing in person. That Christ is with us always. And after we die, if we are true followers of his, we will be raised from the dead. Just like everybody at the resurrection, I thought. Is still the resurrection here? Sure is. This guy here in the white is Adam. This person over here in the red is Eve. There's 2 people that died, and what the hell? Here they are. He's got them and he's pulling them up. But look how he's got them. He doesn't have them by the hand. He has them by the wrist. Now why is that, you think? Why do you think he didn't have them by the hand, by the wrist? If I grip someone in handshake and it's really weak, what do I think about that person? They're weak. But if I grip their hand and it's really strong, that's a strong person. Don't worry. It's all right. He's not bothering anybody. Leave him alone. He's like Jairus' daughter. Let him run. It's okay. Trust me. I like it when they run around. At least they're not sleeping. He grabbed them by the wrist because they had been in hell for so long that they had no strength to even stand up. So he grabbed them from the wrist and pulled them out of the tombs. Adam and Eve, who represent all of us, all of humanity. And then you see all these other people that are there, that were also raised from the dead. People who had died and had gone to hell because there was no way to get to heaven until this event of the resurrection. We now have a chance. When we die, and we're going to. Is there anybody here that doesn't think they're going to die? Raise your hand. Let's talk about it. We're all going to die. Some of us are going to die very old. Some maybe not so old. Some young. But we're all going to go. If we're followers of Christ, we got nothing to worry about. Nothing. Nothing. Because this life will end. And then when it ends, you know some of the great things that happen? You don't have to pay taxes anymore. You don't have to go to school anymore. You don't have to watch the 700 channels on cable anymore. How many housewives of which city do you want to talk about today? Or any of that stuff. It all disappears. And we live with God, with Christ, with Anaya, with the saints in paradise. That's what we want. That's the number one goal. Get to paradise. If that's not your number one goal, change it today. Marrying the prettiest woman, the most handsome guy, 3-car garage, $1 million in your 401k, stack of gold all over the. None of that will matter at the end. When you're gone, none of that goes with you. Nothing. They're not going to put the gold bars in your coffin. Trust me, they're not. All it does is your soul. And so prep it. Be ready for this day in your life, which is coming. Definitely is coming. Now, the interruption part. In your life, every so often you're going to be interrupted by strange things. Somebody you're going to encounter somewhere. Maybe at an intersection in your car. Maybe at the grocery store parking lot. Maybe at work. Someone is going to interrupt you. When they interrupt you, you, like Jesus, perform a miracle. Now, what do I mean by that? If someone is in need and you stop and help them, you become their guardian angel. You help them. Take the interruption and make it a positive. Don't get angry, which is our normal thing. Ah, you're bothering me. Really? We are with our fellow man in the struggle of life. Help each other as best you can. It's important. I love it. He's laughing. And why not? It's okay. With your permission, I'm going to go back inside with Father Demetrious and with the acolytes. And we're going to go ahead and finish the second half of the Divine Liturgy. We have finished the first half, which is up to the Gospel reading and the sermon, typically is at this point. And now we will begin the portion where we're preparing the gifts. We're taking that wine and that bread. And symbolically, we're going to bring it into the church with that procession. Okay? You ever wonder why there's a procession? Because in the early church, all of that stuff was done outside of the church, in another building. And deacons and priests would bring the gifts into the church. That's why we got that procession. And brought into the church and put on the altar. So we're commemorating sort of a historical way we used to do things. That's why. In the Orthodox Church, we don't do anything just to do it. There's a connection and a reason for everything. And so we'll prepare the gifts. And then when you hear, in the fear of God, faith, and love, draw near, from Father Demetrious, it's not Father Demetrious talking. It's God talking. Come and receive the gift that I am getting ready to give you, my Son. The body and blood of my Son I give to you for healing. The medicine of our life is the Eucharist. And the word Eucharist is a Greek word, Eucharisto. Thank you for giving us the gift, Lord, so that we can be strong as we move on to the next one. Okay? They're probably going to be partners in a company somewhere together.
Yeah, they're not cousins.
It doesn't matter. I can just tell. All right, well, let's go ahead and say. Okay.